or political persuasion over another, maybe those ought to be viewed as political contributions and regulated like a regular monetary donation. And that's what's really frightening if that ever came into play.
Well, I mean, they're arresting governors for crooked toenails because they're politically involved, they're Republican. They're arresting Dinesh D'Souza. Imagine if Michael Moore was arrested. I mean, the IRS is already persecuting 10% of the Tea Party if you give money. They're telling the military, don't be part of the Tea Party, you'll be court-martialed. I mean, this is real draconian attempts to chill free speech. It's outrageous criminality in my view.
Well, I think what we may need to bring some lawsuits, they're called declaratory judgments, in order to get First Amendment protection from the courts before, the Orwellian censorship starts to intervene here. But there's no doubt that's what the liberal crowd thinks, that they know how to prescribe, what's decent and what's fair over the airwaves, and basically that means becoming an echo chamber of them. Now, it was very interesting, I thought, that several weeks ago, former Associate Justice John Paul Stevens was interviewed with regard to his recommendation that various amendments be passed to overcome the Citizens United decision, giving freedom of corporations and labor unions and organizations in general to spend limitless amounts of money on their own to exercise free speech, which we should applaud. We should applaud people who want to spend more on political speech than selling shaving cream or cosmetics. I think that's more healthy for society. And in his proposal, he was asked, well, how would that work with regard to the media and newspapers? Would they not be able to, under this amendment, to editorialize in favor against candidates? And he was puzzled. He said, well, hadn't thought about that. Maybe he's got to rethink, some of his draconian efforts to have government circumscribe freedom of speech. But I think that's indicative of the liberal viewpoint. Money is bad unless it supports your particular view, and then money is fine. But that's not supposed to work. In a liberal society, you get people who seek to persuade, and they exert their own efforts in single or in combination, and let the people decide based upon the argument, not based upon government putting their thumb on one side of speech as opposed to another.
My issue is when you have sensational levels of tyranny and power grabbing going on, we've gotten slowly basted over time into accepting it and kind of gotten a normalcy bias or a mass Stockholm syndrome. And I think it's important to somehow make a big noise, show that people understand what we're facing. I mean, you were successful convincing people inside the FCC to change this. There was some pressure in Congress. Now there's a big move back into it as Congress feels the heat and as MSNBC admits they have basically no viewers. What do you in your gut think is going to happen, A, and then B, what can we do to counter all this?
Well, first, what can you do to counter it? There are ways in which you can force, you can petition an agency on your own to adopt a rule or to revoke a rule. And this is, and there are, under the Administrative Procedure Act, each agency has rules that prescribe how you undertake this. But the way we stop it is, say, write into these agencies, write into members of Congress, this is an outrage. You want freedom of speech to remain uncensored from any government warping, any government distortions, and that if they don't take action to ensure the openness and freedom of speech here, they'll lose their vote at the next election. We all have First Amendment rights that need protected, just like we have Fourth Amendment rights that were disclosed being trampled on by Edward Snowden. And if they don't have the courage to protect them, they'll find somebody else who will at the voting booth. And also, it's worthwhile thinking of bringing a declaratory judgment action, and with regard perhaps even to a class action, worried that they're not going to hear unfiltered, uncensored speech, and seeking to enjoin these agencies from moving forward, depending upon how far down they are in the rulemaking process.
Do you think they'll be successful?
Right now, I think it would be difficult because the Republicans still control the House, and it would be very difficult, in my mind, for any of these agencies to act quickly enough, given the requirements of process before November. And at that point, if the Republicans can obtain control of the Senate, I think we have a veto over any of these agency adventurism leaps into regulating speech. But I don't know. Who knows what will happen in November on the Senate side? It's still very dicey.
What's crazy for me is that they were ever able to get away with the fairness doctrine to begin with. I know you know the history better than most. Where did it come from? How did they ever sneak an openly anti-First Amendment monstrosity in?
Well, the fairness doctrine emerged by the FCC. It wasn't a statutory child in the late 1940s. And it was at the early stages, Alex, of radio and television. And the politicians, they were very worried that if they maybe angered radio or TV, that they could be completely destroyed at the next election. And it was that fear, because it was such a novel media vehicle, that made, I think, the Congress stay back and not push or try to revoke what the FCC had done. But that's what it was. It was, well, we don't know how far the media, the radio and television, could change electoral results. Therefore, let's keep a government thumb on what these people do. And then the first time when it became a focus of Congress was with the presidential debates in 1960 with Kennedy and Nixon, where you recall there was an issue. Well, how can you have the debates on and satisfy fairness doctrine because you're only having two candidates, not all the candidates? And so Congress passed a special statute that enabled the two leading presidential candidates to debate without violating fairness. And then it's right in there. It says, and nothing, however, in this statute shall be construed to override the FCC's fairness doctrine outside the presidential debate category. And I think at that time, too, the Congress was worried still in 1960 that the media would have sufficient power outside of their control that to give them a complete leash would be too dangerous. And so they wanted to have something around the throat of the media that would make certain they wouldn't be too critical of the incumbents. And that was what was going on.
Sure. Constitutional lawyer Bruce Fein joins us right now. We've got about 6 minutes left with him. I mean, you're a smart guy. You advise Congress, Rand Paul, you name it. In your gut, knowing how the media works, being in the FCC, watching Washington, I just don't see how they can stop a renaissance of new media. But it's almost like the immovable object coming in contact with an irresistible force. They need to shut us down or curtail us, or we will extinct them by nature of free market ideas. But at the same time, they still have the regulatory control and the hoarded bureaucratic money and so many things at their disposal. It's like two runaway trains going at each other. What does your gut tell you is coming in the media landscape? I want you to think about that while I play this short clip of Obama at last weekend's Correspondents' Dinner making a joke, kind of like whistling past the graveyard politically, about the death of establishment fascist media posing as liberal, a.k.a. MSNBC.
MSNBC is here. They're a little overwhelmed. They've never seen an audience this big before. But look, everybody is trying to keep up with this incredibly fast-changing landscape.
And I'll tell you how they're doing it. They're doing it with government product propaganda placement, behavior placement is what they call it, with hundreds of millions of dollars a year spent in funding propaganda inside of TV shows, dramas, movies. That's where the real brainwashing is going. So how do they get away with saying, let's get rid of talk radio or Matt Drudge, but at the same time, government agencies are everywhere funding the view of the government through entertainment?
Yeah. Well, that's the nature of political power. It's not even-handed. Indeed, the fairness doctrine was openly boasted by then Democratic Chairman Larry O'Brien in the 60s as a way to get so-called right-wing religious broadcasters off the airwaves. He was referring, I think, to Carl McIntyre at the time. So it was openly used as a political instrument. That's what politicians do with power. Use it to advance their particular persuasion at the expense of freedom and the decision in the American people to decide one way or the other. Now, you said, what's in the future? Typically, in the regulatory arena, Alex, the technology is going to outfox the regulators. There'll be so many alternate media vehicles, that comes every cycle becomes shorter and shorter when they have new ways to deliver the message in the media. I don't think that the law will be able to, to catch up with it. In some ways, that happened to the Fairness Doctrine, too. It never did apply to cable. It never did apply to satellite. It was limited to over-the-air broadcasting. And that's when it began in 1948. And my view is this is sort of fortunate that the regulators are too slow-footed. They're too glacial-footed in order to keep up with the technology, and that will enable us to minimize the amount of damage they're able to do through the regulatory process.
And I'm not endorsing the censorship, but that which does not kill us only makes us stronger. So many times innovation comes, as you know, from the attempt to censor or block people. Yeah. It forces us to adapt and overcome.
That is absolutely correct. And I say we're more nimble than the regulators. I say I've been in government, and lead-footed is a euphemism for how slow the bureaucracy turns and how backward they are. Even one of the issues right now with regard to the NSA surveillance, they're using computers and technology that's 15 years old. They wouldn't need to keep all this metadata in their own computers if they'd use something that was available on the market, but they're still living in the past, and that's the NSA. So, I say in some sense that's a saving feature, if you will, of how slow and backward government is.
If the pro-human, pro-liberty, pro-human empowerment movement is one team, and the control freaks, the socialists, the gang members, the thugs of history, the king rats are the other team, where are we in the Super Bowl game right now? I mean, I see a huge awakening happening, a lot of great things happening, but I see government and monopoly capitalist groups teaming up together to try to make the public dependent and to try to dumb down the culture, a.k.a. Common Core, to have an end game where we're as dumb and slow as they are, and so they finally win.
Well, I think, Alex, we are in peril because our whole political culture is so-called dumbed down. And it's not just, entertainment, it's the schools. If it was just Common Core and not the general degradation of learning, literacy, reading, critical thinking, I'd rejoice. But it's far more pervasive. It's the culture itself celebrates Honey Boo Boo and not people who read and think. And that's got to change if we're going to remain a republic. You cannot run a democratic dispensation unless the people are alert and intelligent and vigilant over government abuses. If we're like sheep, we get wolves in government, and that's got it. We have to change the entire milieu of our educational system, our entire standards for who youth should be idolizing, and it's not those who are on American Idol. It's on those who have moral philosophy and stature. If we're going to turn this around before we fall off the empire cliff.
Very well said. I know you've got a couple books out. I've read your latest. I guess people can go to Amazon to find that or just Google your name, Bruce Fein. What's the best website for people to visit if they want to be able to contact you?
Well, I'm building a new website, but if they go to Bruce Fein and Associates Inc. In the Google, that's the fastest way to get to me in my law firm and speaking and whatever. I'm building a totally new website, refashioning, rebranding Bruce Fein. So I hope in another 30 days it'll be easier, more consumer friendly than right now.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate you spending it with us.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Have a good day.
All right. There he goes. And again, that's an example of how government can be a tool for good. Someone who's moral going and saying, look, this violates the First Amendment. We got to get rid of this. And he took a stand. And more people in the system need to do that because we're under corporate governance now. Corporations run government. And then they're busy demonizing corporations in general so they can shut down all the businesses and companies they don't control. I mean, it's just public illiteracy about street smarts, social IQ. Everything is in the toilet. We have to honor trailblazers and people that are honorable and inventors. That's what will make us great again, not all these sports icons. I mean, that's why we're so screwed up, folks. We honor stuff that doesn't matter.
We're on the march.
Got a powerful video coming up.
Run. Alex Jones and the GCN Radio Network.